Hi, my name is James. So my parents, you probably know my parents. My parents are Brecon, Pauline, Tonkin. I actually have a fairly long association with SBC. My dad was in the Air Force, so our first stint in Sale / Stratford was in 2000 to 2010. So most of that was during my teenage years. So I did 6 years of youth group, and I was actually a youth intern as soon as I finished school in 2008. So I was born with spina bifida. Spina bifida is a neurological condition where your back doesn't form properly, including the skin. So basically I had a big hole in my back and in my spine. Your spinal cord is within your spine. So what that meant was all my nerves going into my legs, unfortunately, were outside my body. So all they could do was shove them back in and close over the hole. That affected 3 things: bone growth, muscle development, and sensation. I wouldn't say that it's uniform. I would say that it's patchy. So, for example, I might be able to feel here, or I can't feel there, or whatever. Some places I feel shallow pain, so something that's happening on the surface around your skin, but I might be able to feel deep pain, or like something around the bone, or in a place I might not be able to, or I might be able to feel the shallow pain but not the deep pain. So it has, as I said, bone growth and muscle development were affected. It has meant that I've needed quite a few corrective surgeries on my legs. I've had an ankle reconstruction. I broke my bones earlier this year, and I've had knee surgery, and so all up I've had 35 surgeries. When you consider that I'm only 33, that is more than 1 year that I've been alive. I think growing up in a Christian home, you sort of just get into these rhythms. And so the rhythms for me while I was a teenager was stuff happens, I deal with the stuff, and we move on. And I guess it wasn't until I became an adult that I really sort of started to understand that rhythm and where that rhythm comes from. And it really comes from a place of faith and peace. Because, if God is in control, then at the end of the day, all of this is going to be okay. And that God is actually bigger than the things that we are going through. So he actually has it under control. We might not think that he has it under control, but at the end of the day, he knows. I think back to my teenage years, and I had that really rudimentary faith where I read something in the Bible and I believed it. And so you read stories of healing. One that really resonates with me is the healing at the Gate Beautiful in Acts, and where Peter just says, "I can't give you what you think you want, but I can give you what I know you need. Get up and walk." And my question was, if Peter can just say, "Get up and walk," why can't I have the power of Jesus within me? Why can't I just say, "James, walk," or "I am healed"? And so I guess in my teenage years, I was sort of grappling with that, and you sort of block out what's hard. And so there was this off the cuff, God can heal me, but I didn't actually pursue it, because if I pursued it and it didn't happen, I would be let down. I didn't want to go down that track. If someone asked me, "Can God heal me?" Yeah, God can heal me. But, pursuing it is another matter. I remember this one time during my internship, and it was we were doing a youth on a Friday night, youth rally on a Friday night, and it was a really impactful sermon. And so it sort of lingered. I was down the back in the media box doing all the media, and so I sat there until I realised that they weren't going to go into any more songs, or there wasn't going to be much more music. And so I shut down the computers and everything, and I walked down to the front because I thought, well, I'll be available for anyone who needs me. I stepped one step towards the front of the church, and just the presence of God just slammed me like a ton of bricks. But that sense of the presence of God has just come in to my life so many times in some extraordinary ways. After as an intern, I moved to Geelong. I was only there for a year, and within that first year I had some fairly serious medical issues, which meant that I questioned whether Geelong was the right place for me. That was my ankle reconstruction, and so what that meant is they had to break my tibia, my ankle, because my tibia was twisted, so they had to straighten that. But then when they straightened my tibia, my foot was at the wrong angle, so they had to break that and straighten that. Because they broke so many bones in my ankle, I was in what was called external fixation, which, if you can imagine, a big ring here, a big ring here, and a big ring here, and then they had pins that go from one side of the foot to right through the middle to the other side, and so through here, through here, through here, through here, through here, through here, and then they have one that drives the whole thing. And so I was in those external fixations for 10 weeks. Just so happened that that same year Dad got posted to Adelaide, and so I decided to move to Adelaide for that time, do the same or similar course in Adelaide. Unfortunately, their way of doing disability support was, yep, sweet, you've got spina bifida, cool, see you and your degree. I tried for about 3 or 4 weeks and decided, no, can't do this. So that was a fairly hard time going. I've moved to Adelaide, I barely know anyone, and I lost my sense of what I'm actually doing here. It's funny how God works, because that same year my grandfather got mesothelioma and died late that year. We hadn't lived in Adelaide my whole childhood, so at that point I was 20 years old, so I had only seen my grandfather on and off maybe once or twice a year for my first 20 years. It was the first year I'd spent the whole year in Adelaide with my grandparents. And so you can sort of see where God's working. He's brought me over to Adelaide for that season where Granddad was sick and passed away. I get that sense looking back. At the time I probably was a little bit annoyed at God. But looking back, I can see where God was at work. I finished up at uni doing a Bachelor of Arts and Commerce in 2014. Around that time, my church merged with a smaller church on the other side of Geelong, and I was approached to set up a youth program at that church. And I thought, yeah, that sounds good. I'd always been keen on youth and on leadership, and so at the time I'm like, yeah, this is a really good step for me. So I went over there. I was key leader for 2 years. So the truth is I burnt out after these 2 years. I wasn't angry at God. I almost felt like God was the only thing I was hanging on to. Yeah, so I went to Melbourne and I was in that season of burnout. Now, once again, God working in miraculous ways. The church that I landed at in Melbourne was probably the best place for me. Even though I had extensive youth experience. They didn't throw me into ministry straight away. The youth pastor at that church, he allowed me to say what I was feeling. He just went, "This is your story and I just want to hear it." And that was a great time of healing. After I finished my graduate diploma, I moved into school chaplaincy. And so I was in school chaplaincy at 2 schools in Melbourne, and only finished up at the end of last year. What I found through talking to other people and seeing other people's reactions is that I don't need to have all the answers. I don't need to have this major theological position on everything. All I need to be is authentic. Through my story, people would actually learn about what it's like to move through challenges. If people can understand how to be resilient, part of that is actually hope. Jesus is your hope, and Jesus will never let you down. And so that's how I move forward, going, Jesus is my hope. (2020-2021), in amongst COVID and everything, we're sort of going, what's realistic in terms of independence? And we came to a position of, look, my back is deteriorating, and so there's going to be a time where living in Melbourne isn't practical. The thought of leaving Melbourne, leaving a job that I was enjoying, leaving a church that I was involved in and enjoying at the time, was frustrating and annoying. You don't question God, but you just go, all right, this is another pothole on the road. God, what do you actually want? It was a time of really searching and trying to work out where God wanted me. And I guess it's one of those times where we were talking about before, where you sort of just shut off parts because you put it in the too hard basket. Unfortunately, in November last year, I fractured my femur. Actually broke it in half. Yeah, people ask me how I did it, and the truth is that quite unbelievably, I was just doing a glute stretch and I was lifting my leg off my knee at the time, and I just heard this massive crack, like a gunshot going off. Yeah, my leg went dead, and I went into shock. Luckily, my housemate was sitting right next to me. When he looked at me, I was white as a ghost, and he called the ambulance. At this point, I thought I must have dislocated my hip, because I'm like, how on earth could, it wasn't even a consideration of how could I have snapped a bone. So I went to the hospital, and sure enough, I snapped my femur in half and had to have surgery. That was surgery number 34. And so they had to put a rod in the length of my femur inside the bone to make it strong again. Unfortunately, that didn't work as well as they would have hoped. The fracture didn't heal. And so earlier this year, I had more surgery to put a bone graft into the femur. That worked really well. The bone was healed within 2 or 3 weeks, which was absolutely amazing considering the pain and the weakness that I was going through the previous 6 months. I always had the plan to go back to work, whether that was term 1 or term 2. That was always the plan. When I went to the doctor and he said, we need to have more surgery, the sick leave was just getting longer and longer. I obviously didn't want to resign from work and, step away from ministry at church. But at the end of the day, as much as I'm disappointed, I know that it's God's plan. The thing that I remember when I'm in those times of valley, in those times of depth of despair, is that the Bible heroes actually went through the same thing. That makes me feel okay to actually get a little bit annoyed with God and to actually tell him that I'm annoyed with him. Then turn around and go, but it's actually okay that I am going to get through this because I have that faith in God. I look back at the Lord's Prayer and it says, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. The kingdom of God is actually here on earth. It's here on earth and in heaven. I believe that if we have enough faith, we can see the things of heaven coming down here on earth. We carry the kingdom of God with us. When God promises to heal me, I don't see this distinction between earth and heaven. Also, time is God's. We have this concept of time, but it's actually so different to God's sense of time, because God is for eternity and our sense of time is so minute compared to eternity. God will heal me 100%. God will heal me in his time, whether that's in this creation or whether that's in the new creation. That's up to God. Despite my circumstance, I'm going to trust that God's got it under control and I'm going to live life in his power. A good friend of mine once said, you only truly find God when you get to the end of yourself. That has resonated with me throughout my whole journey, that it's okay to admit that you're at the end of yourself. You can't go on anymore, but that's the time that God really breaks through. Now, a lot of people ask me, how can you have faith in a season that you're in? My kind of answer is, how can I not? Because at the end of the day, the context of my suffering, if you like, is within God. So therefore, if I believe that God is in control, that actually gives me a little bit of peace to go, no matter what I go through, it's going to be okay.